We ran a for sale process, which we successfully did, found a new owner. And at that point, I thought my assignment was finished, but the new owner decided he wanted me to stay on and, shall we say, restart the company, did a major restructure of the business. And that's exactly what I'm doing on my current assignment. My background is telecoms, media, tech, generally speaking. I was an executive in a number of TMT type businesses over my career, became an interim in 2006 and concentrate specifically on transforming businesses end to end. And some of the points have already been made, I'm sure, but for me, when someone talks about digital transformation, that for me is largely a business-wide transformation, full stop. You cannot deliver digital transformation of businesses, whether they're bricks and mortar or whether they're already an advanced digital business. And I work in the tech sector, so I know a little bit about it. It has to be an holistic approach. And that's basically what I specialize in. In this particular case, I'm doing as the CEO. And usually when I am transforming businesses, that tends to be the seat I'm put in, or Chief Transformation Officer, where I'm largely doing most of that transformation from that seat. But it has to be, in my opinion, holistic.
Yeah, it's interesting because your experience kind of mirrors some of mine. Going in as Chief Transformation Officer, not to frighten the CEO, but then becoming the CEO because the PE house, obviously, the reason they wanted a Chief Transformation Officer was, they figured the CEO was they had reservations, and that change came 6 months into my assignment, and a bit like you, then post COVID, it was right. What are we going to do with this business? We're going to have to reinvent it, kickstart it, refinance it, do the whole kit and caboodle. And they're still deciding whether or not they're going to deploy their capital, having got everybody else's ducks lined up. They've even got the senior debt in place, but they're still debating whether they deploy their capital. And interestingly enough, those decisions are all based on data analytics. And so one of my jobs this morning was kind of getting in touch with various data bureaus and some of our partners to recut some of the analysis that we've already done 4 times.
So it's interesting you mentioned that then, Bruce. So you said that it's already that they haven't decided to say yes yet. What's the sort of the fundamental concern behind it? They don't really buy the journey or don't invest?
Well, no, they've finished up, Ben, with a business that they bought as a bargain about, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, within, what do you call the rules? It's not Marquis of Queensberry. It's what are the privacy rules under which we can talk?
Chatham House rules.
Chatham House, right. So under Chatham House rules, I can tell you that, it's Oak Tree Capital. It's a business that they bought from Dollar or one of those guys. I think it was Dollar Financial Services 4 years ago. And no sooner had they done that than they ran into regulatory headwinds, and they couldn't do. They were providing effectively payday lending, which is called high cost credit in the Nordics. It's not called payday lending, SMS loans, and the regulator said you can't do that anymore. So they were sitting on a back book of business that they were able to sweat the asset, but they couldn't do any more of it.
Right.
And then no sooner had they done that than regulation changed, rate caps came in, and they basically had to pivot the business from what they were doing to near from subprime to near prime. Mm-hmm. And the question was, could you make the return? Could you make the hurdle rates? Based on the fact that you needed a new capital structure, you needed a new product, you had regulatory headwinds, you had to move out, and COVID exacerbated this because the Finnish government then put a 10% rate cap on lending. So we've pivoted the business into Sweden. So we've got a successful outcome for them on the back book. It's a question of whether or not they want to deploy new capital, and this is a fund that raised during the pandemic, raised 1.5 billion of dry powder, and went and bought a very, very large business in the UK with that, and from a household name bank, But they've got this little thing that, you know, they're thinking, you know, will we, won't we, will we, won't we? And it's all based on, you know, no data. They've never done it before. So where do you get the data? And they are absolutely I mean, they're not going to back a hunch. I mean, because I say, yeah, I think it's a good idea, does not wash. It's Bruce, that's great. You know, we love you to death, but where's the numbers? And so, you know, trying to find data and lean on data, and of course, build then predictive models that are going that are going to tell them over the life of an investment what's going to happen, and be confident enough to make the first step. I.e., you know, within 6 months to 12 months, we'll know whether or not the assumptions are holding or not. But they've got to deploy that initial capital. So it's all about risk appetite,
right?
And having the analytics to support this. And of course, culturally for them, I think, you know, it's one of these cultures that if they get it wrong, if you're an investment manager in this kind of business and you make the wrong call, that's deeply embarrassing. So you've got reputational risk within the firm as well, which as a leader of a portfolio company is quite an interesting kind of place to be. But that's my current one. I mean, I've got lots of experience of this business of, you know, companies that have bought all the kit. So they embarked on a digital transformation, bought all the bells and whistles, didn't know how to configure it. I'm talking about Salesforce now, particularly. and basically the CEO stopped looking at these reports because nobody believed the data that was coming out of this ERP system that they'd hired a bunch of consultants to configure, but it was all wrong. So having gone in there as CEO, one of the first things we had to do was absolutely pull Salesforce apart. Now, luckily enough, I've got a background in that kind of stuff. And again, to the points that have been made, as a CEO going into that, you need to absolutely have the ability to land your helicopter on where you see some of these problems, or where you think the root cause of some of these problems was, because nobody else was going to go in and unstitch this whole configuration that a bunch of consultants who were still on a retainer had been hired to configure this Salesforce thing. And it all came back that basically a marketing director who was no longer there said he wanted it done this way. They all told him that wasn't the right way to do it. He left, and the business was left with a system that was supposed to be churning out data and analytics that was just absolutely wrong.
That's always the way with ERP programs, isn't it? There's always someone who says, can it do this? And the answer from the consultants putting it in should be, why do you want it to do that? But they go, yes, it can.
Yeah, and they send them the invoice. Exactly. And that was absolutely the thing. So, you know, if you're going in with digital or transformation in your title, you'd better know where the dead bodies are, because you're going to have to dig them up at some point. And it's sometimes not where you think they are. That's the other thing. So so that's Nigel. Michael, you're there. Can you hear us?
I can't, yes, and apologies as I say for. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. So
yeah,
do you want to introduce you? So do you know Dave, Ben, and Richard?
No, I don't. But as I say, I have been out of the country for some time, and obviously it's great to see the first session and talk to people. But most of my work, in fact, I would say all of my work in the last 15 years has come from word of mouth and connections, and that's nothing against all the wonderful people out there. Obviously, I do work with them. But my role, as well, Bruce, as a fellow IIM board member, my role is I'm an accountant by profession and an MBA. And for 22 years now, I've been fixing finance departments, but not resting in the finance departments, hence the interest in the digital transformation. So my world is really walking the floor, spending time right across teams to ensure that not just the finance is serving other members and other parts of the business, but clearly the efficiencies are there and the business is all aligned. And I think one of the apt things with technology I like is working with technologists for them to get business, but equally working with business for them to get the powers of technology. So really I have quite a nice passport going in. I'm working with 2 clients back now, working with 2 clients. One is on investor readiness for a potentially huge startup, which is coordinated with various banks. And we're working on a lot of modeling to do with that. And the other project, which is the converse really, is a bricks and mortar company, been trading for 40 plus years, but of course in its retail, but of course due to the pandemic has struggled, but the operation is looking to, which it ought to have done previous, but to get a stronger digital platform. So working with that company and the teams across driving the business. And, you know, but what they did do, what I was particularly pleased with this business is they were ahead of the curve back in September of 19, which when I first went into the client, we worked on a whole transformation project. And what's happened is their competition now coming through the crisis had not done that. So a lot of those competitors are saddled with huge costs, and now they're trying to capture new business, whereas this business ripped millions of pounds out of its cost base. But nonetheless, it's challenging. I think I've heard that word 2 or 3 times today. But yeah, that's my world. Is yes, I'm happy to bash balance sheets, but that's not my main facet. It's working right across the business to get the best use of technology and get that magic one version of the truth.
Yeah. Michael, so thank you for that. So in terms of the business you're working at then, we've talked previously about it being a sort of CIO digitally led environment, and we need to bring the business, educate them to the art of the possible. And then,
yes,
you know, and also I guess that my perspective, when these things are led by technology, maybe the people change elements aren't appreciated, and therefore you don't necessarily get the value out of what it is you're trying to do. What's the experience at your current business?
Well, I think, yeah, it's an absolute fair point. But again, and it was said earlier, it's about the people and the processes, less so the technology. You get those two, particularly the people, wrong. I've worked in various companies where, in one large business, which was ended up as part of the BBC, and then it left the BBC, but they were very proud that they put in a new ERP system. And I asked to look at the spec for that ERP system. And this, I'm talking about this because this is the general theme. It's, and I'm not actually dissing IT vendors, but, you know, they've been sold the magic Ryzen Sun, you know, the Japanese Ryzen Sun, all your legacy problems, your 15 different systems you've had before will come magically together through this new ERP system. The spec was wrong. They didn't coordinate with the staff. It wasn't understanding deeply enough of the customers and the suppliers. So essentially it was a beautiful, nicely shiny toy. So my job, and you talked about it earlier, Bruce, was to go in and literally rip out that ERP system. The message in my world, and this underlines my 22 years as a practice in interim, is get back to basics, talk to people, ideally outside the boardroom, talk to people who actually really know what's happening across the business, but deeply listen and work with them, and, you know, identify the wins as well as being able to tactfully be able to point out when things are, it'll probably not quite work, but you don't switch people off, because if you can gather the enthusiasm, you can ring fence some of the little trials and errors. But what I do find, and this really is the skill set of an interim, the ability to leave, the ability to move on, or in many cases, to move into the organization, other parts of the organization. So it's back to people, Ben. It's spending time listening, learning, and working bloody hard, and then getting a fantastic holiday, which we've just had. And I've come down with this cold, so apologies, I'm not so chatty today. It's this UK weather.
The people bit's quite a key one, because it's. I mean, we've had to go in and to your point about someone buying an ERP that just wasn't fit for purpose. The problem is that the person that bought it and signed the order didn't know what they were looking for, and sometimes they end up doing these big spends before they've actually had maybe an interim or an external consultant, or as you say, someone outside of the boardroom, to be able to assess what the business needs and be able to help them understand whether it's going to be a good capital investment or not. You go in and say, well, this isn't right for your business. We'll just go, well, it's too late now. We've bought it. And it's like, well, why did you buy it? Well, the vendor told me that it was what we needed.
Yes.
And then that's, you either put it in the bin, which is really what should happen, or you just try and make it work. And I think the other thing with people as well, and interims, and I suppose the nervousness around interims sometimes, is that interims can sometimes go in and be less sensitive to the capabilities of the existing workforce within the business. I work with a lot of businesses that aren't necessarily in London and are sort of in all sort of far-flung remote places in the country where they're not necessarily recognised to be the hotbed of digital talent. Now, what you can have as a digital expert going in and go, look how good I am, look how you wanted this done in 6 months, I've done it in 3. And what you have is some badly led full-time equivalents that are despondent and leave, which is a disaster because you're not in an area where you can rehire them quickly. And then your headcount falls apart, which you desperately need. And I suppose the thing about people to get right within the interim is that interims aren't looking or shouldn't be looking for a promotion or look how good I am. And the only measure of success is whether you've been able to shift the dial and delivered the outcomes and objectives that the client wanted. And that it was a good digital transformation or good at whatever piece of work. And that the existing headcount within those businesses had a nice time. Change in digital transformation is great, but it's scary if it's badly led because you've never done it before, you've never experienced it before, and you're relying and putting all of your eggs in this one interim's basket. We've actually sort of battled and actually made it an ultimate priority to make sure that the interim's personality is a congruent cultural fit to the businesses we're putting these people into.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And I mean, one of the things that I keep coming across and explaining to my clients is that it's never about the magic that I bring to a project. It's if there is a skill, it's being able to go in and listen to what the real issue is. And as Mike says, that you generally get to that by walking the floor and talking to the people that are, got their nose up against the customer or their nose up against the issue. And time again, you'll sit down with them and they'll tell you what the issue is and how to solve it. And you'll say, well, why didn't you? Have you said that? Oh yeah, but they wouldn't listen. Yeah. And it's that problem of, as I said earlier, these kind of bureaucracies. And in many cases, that sort of layer of self-interested middle to senior management who have invested their corporate career in climbing up the greasy pole and are determined not to slide down it again. And those guys, because generally the leadership, the CEO, the boards are top people because they've been hired to be top people. And they've been referenced and sourced by firms like yourselves. And the people on the grassroots community are again well educated, come to work to do a good job. Nobody comes to work to have a bad day. But somewhere along the line they get blocked. And if there's a skill, it's kind of just having the mandate to circumnavigate that, almost identify what the real issue is, and then reframe that solution in a way that basically everybody can nod to and say, yeah, that's it, and then implement it. But 9 times out of 10, the solution was in the room before you got there. There was no magic of, oh, we need a Salesforce, or we need this, or we need that, or we need some gizmo. I mean, yes, probably you do. But you all arrive at that point and you configure it properly to do the job that everybody requires doing in terms of that, as I think Nigel said, the corporate, the body corporate, the business in the round required, rather than the CEO's hobby horse or the marketing guy used this piece of kit in his last job and knows the supplier well, etc. And as interims, we can cut, or we should be cutting across all that. no politics, being able to sort out what the real issue is, talk truth to power, and then marshal the resources to be able to go and do that. And it's interesting because, you know, 9 times out of 10, what I hear in my assignments is, Bruce, we'd never thought of that. And I say, yeah, but you did.
Yeah. I mean, I've got a story. Actually, it's a true but a very, very sad story of working with a large PLC with the director, and we put a change, and I use that words correctly. There was a team of 25 people. There was a massive project, had not happened for 2 years. They'd been working with various consultants. I mean, I've been working with KPMG, so it wasn't one of them. And together we started to listen all the stuff that's been said, and discovered that all of the things that had been pushed down the throats of these people right across the business, very senior people, was wrong. But that message wasn't getting heard. But the best part, when this was delivered, then this director came to me and he actually said, and I still recall it, he said, "How did you manage to do that?" And I said, "Do what? How did you manage to get that to happen?" And then before I had a chance to say anything, he says, "I've been telling them to do that for years." And I said, "That's how." And, you know, he repeated them. He says, "What's how?" I says, "Repeat what you've just said." It took the 3rd time. I said, "I didn't tell them." You listen, you learn. All right, you find some vested interests, and you've got, and the first 3-4 years of interim, I got caught so many times by the vested interests crowd who were taking the business down the wrong alley. And I didn't see that, but that doesn't happen today. You know, you listen, you learn. But even after all of that, this guy just stormed off and says, I can't be bothered with all this softly approach. That's why things don't happen. But he got promoted. And I just thought, it's something wrong.
Yeah.
But James, a quick question back on an earlier point for Dave, Ben, and Richard. And I find this with clients when I'm talking to them a little bit in terms of needs versus wants. Are you finding that when people want expertise to do digital transformations as labeled, do you tend to find that they look for point solutions to digital transformation, or is it that more holistic approach that they're looking for? Because I sometimes sense that sometimes the individuals who are asking as a client, they sometimes don't appreciate that they need to look at it from a more holistic perspective rather than a point solution in fixing the digital transformation of the ERP system or something.
Yeah.
I'm very curious about what comes out of your needs assessment with your clients, because I found this a couple of times when I've been brought in by a board or whatever, where they've given the job of the digital transformation of the business to the CTO. Now, I've been a CTO and a CIO as much as everyone else has been, and that's the worst place to put it unless you think holistically. Yeah, and often I've had to, you know, take the balls away from the client and go, you know, sorry, let's reset this a little bit, because if you're going to give that responsibility to one function, you're going to have challenges in all sorts of different ways. So yeah, I'm just curious what your own experiences are of dealing with the clients with this need versus want.
Well, we try, and when it comes to making decisions like that, I mean, we try and be pretty authoritative in almost rebutting the client if we think that they're actually, what they need is someone holistically to drive the overall work streams of an overall digital transformation, and therefore needs essentially someone that knows enough about digital generally to be able to lead a program holistically, and knows enough to get into the detail of when things aren't performing properly, but is able to drive holistically the overall performance of the project. I mean, there are, if a client needs to do an e-commerce transformation, for example, or wants to look at digital products, for example, someone that specializes in digital products as opposed to digital marketing is obviously the kind of person that we want. And therefore, we do sort of suggest to the client that, look, you need the specifics and also be the subject matter expertise in the piece or the vertical within digital that you need to address properly. If you're doing digital transformation all at the same time, whether it be tech, whether it be whatever, whether it be tech, whether it be marketing, whether it be brand, whether it be loyalty, whether it be customer engagement or whatever, I don't think it should be ever an internal person that actually leads with it, because some of it is tech, and therefore, yes, a CIO can do some of it, CTO rather. Some of it will be digital marketing, and therefore there's an argument to say, look, should it be the CMO? Yes, it's all our, what we do in digital is all driven by data. Therefore, should it be our chief data officer? And I think if it's a digital transformation, it should always be led by someone external. And then when it becomes a business as usual and just a day-to-day maintenance role, then you create a chief digital officer position. Like a lot of businesses are learning that that's what they need now, because it isn't just, again, fitting it into the conventional job titles and departments of businesses that that aren't necessarily representative of internal business departments anymore, would be my view. And certainly that's what I'm seeing. So we are guiding businesses to look at, to take holistic digital officers when it's a big overall digital program, but you do need specific expertise in some of the granular detail.
Yeah, what's Richard? Are you seeing? What are you seeing? Sorry, not Richard. Ben, what are you seeing in that sort of? To Nigel's question,
I think it depends on the client, depends on the relationship with the client, and what I find often is clients think they know what they want, and despite we, based on our experience and knowing the network, know they want something different. It's not always well received in the first instance to tell them, but often you can use a bit of an iterative approach and sort of educate them along the way, and suggest. And there's been so many times where you know, they present a short list of what would ordinarily be two candidates, that what they think they want. But I then send a third one and say, look, this is a bit of a curveball based on my experience. I don't think it'd be a waste of time talking to this third person. And the amount of time they speak to the third person and go, aha, you were right. And then once you've had that conversation or that situation, then from then onwards, it's a lot easier to sort of steer the clients, or at least give them your sort of trusted experience and opinion on where a role should sit or how it should sit. But I do find at the outset, often, you know, clients think they know what they want, but they don't necessarily. Or conversely, the opposite way around, they are absolutely, I suppose it's the same way around, but they're absolutely like determined on exactly what experience they want. Exactly, they must have come from this background, they must have done this, and you can say, well, actually, it doesn't matter, because it's up here is what the bit you need from them. It's their ability to look at the problem from a different angle and to be able to solve your challenge. So I think a bit of both, really. And I think what's fairly clear, as far as I'm concerned, is the structure of these programs in terms of the sort of program leadership, what's required within it around the change of people elements. I was talking about that earlier. I know you weren't there, Nigel, but the importance of the people and change elements to any kind of tech-enabled program. And some kind of PMO office or structure to provide the framework within which to work to get to where you need to get to. I think all of that's I wouldn't say standard, but speaking to Richard earlier, his world is much more product led, and I think that creates a different environment. There's different types of programs working there, and that's a very agile squad based work where you align yourself to a product and work towards that. Within the corporate functions world, where I tend to focus more, I think the more traditional program structure still fits well. Yeah,
it's interesting, that, isn't it? Because I mean, back in the day when I started in the working independently, and I mean, I didn't even know it was called Intterim at the time. There was kind of a couple of providers, that names that some of you might know. Certainly, Mike has had to go and take a call with a client, but he'd know them if he's been around 22 years. Chris Behan, who was the founder of Odgers, and a guy called Martin Wood, who started at BIE. And I mean, we didn't send CVs. It wasn't, and he didn't send CVs. It was have a coffee with Bruce, and that was how we got work. And I mean, I do it obviously, but I fight shy of when people ask me for a CV, because again, if it comes down to just kind of looking at your thing on paper, how do you actually communicate that? How does somebody read into that? The diversity of thought that you're bringing and how you actually did the job, because it's about that, isn't it? It's not necessarily about the outcome on the paper. It was the fact that none of that existed, none of that outcome on that paper existed before I got there. This was all done in an agile way. The client didn't say, "Oh, we want smile.co.uk, the Britain's first internet bank." "Oh, we didn't want," "Oh, we want more than insurance." I mean, they never thought of that. That was work that, you know, that evolved. So by the time, for me, in doing pure senior level interim, if a client has a job spec, and worse still, if they've got HR involved, you know, to me, that's kind of that there's some warning bells there. I mean, obviously the market's got more sophisticated and clients are buying in a more sophisticated way. But if they're coming looking for an interim solution, you know, do they really know that it's one of those, and one of those? Because they've got no idea about what I've done and how I've done it in the other 35 assignments I've done.
It comes down to communication again, doesn't it? I mean, you touched on it earlier. Everything, you've got to understand exactly what it is your client's looking for. I put my hand up. We're not the people going in to deliver the change. You guys are doing the change, but it's up to us to understand exactly what it is you're trying to deliver and then connect the right people. I think most of the senior people we speak to always allude to the fact the more senior you get, the more lonely the role becomes. You don't always have that ability to bounce ideas off people, to sense check things, and there's a concern that if you then do go to perhaps some of the more boutique consultancies where there's some really, you know, take nothing away, you'll typically get 80 to 90% of what you already know, and the other percentage will be theory. So it's what to your point, Bruce, one of the things that we certainly try to do now is make those introductions where it's more of a community-based model of, let's have a conversation with someone who's actually been through what you're going through right now. You might not engage them. You might not actually take them on board for 12 months, 24 months. You might never take them on board, but at least you've made that connection. You've had the chance to have an hour and a half with someone who knows exactly what it is you're going through and can say, whatever you do, don't do this, because we did this and it was an unmitigated disaster. Even that's a takeaway, you know. So
Dave, I think you make a really good point there. I mean, I certainly, as a client, arguably, that's how I like to operate as well, which is I like to meet people who I may be bringing onto the team for some part of it. And I think picking up Bruce's point and yours there as well, sometimes you don't have a need at a specific moment, but you do remember those moments. And I think then you go, right, okay. And the challenge then, of course, being an interim is the person available to come and join the squad at the moment that you need them. That's always a challenge, of course. But I think you're absolutely right. That approach of getting a relationship going over a coffee that might have been 2 years ago, even, I think is a really good method. And that's certainly what I look for in IIMs to help me, ISP, to help me with that model is, you know, going in on that informal basis is, I think, a really good approach if you can. And from your point of view, it's not a pushy sell, is it? You know, so it's a good way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Those pushy sells don't work either, in my opinion, not in our culture anyway.
I was going to say what I think for there's plenty of recruitment companies out there that will throw CVs and hope that some stick. I mean, the fact that Ben and Richard and I are here, I think we all work in a probably a very similar way. It's about understanding what it is you're trying to achieve. Yeah. And what I think we all hope for is that we can partner with clients and understand where are the gaps over the next 24 months. So rather than thinking about firefighting and right, I'm going to place someone in, I need a body right now. It should be about working collaboratively and then understanding, right, you're going to need a body in 6 months, but actually in 9 months, you haven't got this skill set, and you're going to have a conversation with, or a workshop, or something that's a little bit more partnered.
And that's a really interesting thing. I mean, one of the things that I've thought about for the IIM, who basically, you know, we've had this conversation within the organization ourselves about who are we for, and, you know, what job are we doing for them, and bringing the community together of these kind of, you know, senior level interims that specialize in that kind of diversity of thought and delivering these kind of interesting outcomes for clients. Rather than just, oh, I need an HR director, or I need somebody to come and do this, you know, with a specific thing, which of course, you know, I'm happy to do that because everybody's got to put food on the table and pay the school fees. But, you know, the conversations that we used to have with Behan and Martin Wood were around, he'd get his black book out and he'd phone clients up and he'd be saying, you need to have a coffee with Bruce. It's the first time he's been available for 3 years.
Guys, sorry to interrupt. We have a fire alarm, so
right.
and I'm going to have to evacuate.
Ben,
I'm going to have
listen,
to evacuate the building.
yeah,
so
go and
thank you very much. Yeah,
go and do what you need to
in the
do.
cold.
See you later.
Take care. Cheers.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Ben.
Bye.
Now, again, I mean, it's interesting because obviously that model was overtaken by both the supply of interims and the demand, and everybody, you know, so the gig economy and people coming into the space and putting on their CVs that they were digital transformation consultants. I mean, the amount of LinkedIn profiles that have digital transformation on them, you know, you would assume that the UK was, you know, a pioneer of all things digital and transformative. The amount of work that's going on, or more worryingly, a great number of these things have just failed. Because they haven't delivered competitive advantage for the clients that have hired the people to do it. So there's an interesting, you know, either connect or disconnect. I mean, I'm a segment of one, so I don't see what other people are doing. I don't see the market the way, you know, you three or now you two would be seeing the market. But
yeah, I mean, there's the, I suppose the this is where recruitment wet behind the ears 21-year-old recruitment consultants become unstuck a little bit, particularly around digital, because obviously, to your point, everybody puts digital transformation on their CV, and this is where it's almost a bit futile, because you almost make yourself so generalist because you're using this ambiguous term that you don't get any work. And I suppose this is where the distinction is between the recruitment world and us that are maybe a little bit more sort of older and a few more grey hairs that have been around the block a few times, is that invariably I see more change than my clients have. And therefore I can be quite authoritative on really having, I don't need to be subordinate to these people, and I don't need to be shy about giving them advice and the benefit of my front row seat to pretty much everything their competitors and what the broader sector is doing to deliver change effectively, and not and making some mistakes, and I get to see it, and I get to see the backpedaling, I get to see the remediation, and then I can be quite right first time. And that's where it becomes, if I had to get a digital transformation role and I had to search our database for digital transformation people, it would come up with about 80% of our database. And there'd be about 96,000 candidates that would come up in that shortlist because it appears in everyone's CV. So what you pay for when you go to firms like ours and Practicus and Eton Bridge and Odgers and all these sorts of ones is that line of sight where it is, Bruce, to your point, you need to go and have a drink or a coffee with these three people. The CV has digital transformation in it, but you won't spot it. You won't spot in the CV what you need because you don't know what you're looking for, which is why you're knocking on my door in the first place.
Yeah, exactly.
So come to me, I know what you need, and I'm going to help you understand it. But to help you understand it, I'm going to introduce you for coffee with these three people, free of charge. And they're going to give you a much clearer idea as to what you need, and then you can come to me, and then we'll find the candidates that we both agree.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. That.
Yeah, because I mean, what I've done in a number of these assignments is I've said, look, I tell you what, hire me for 3 days. I'll have a sniff around, and I'll tell you potentially what I could do.
Yeah.
You know, and we don't get involved in, you know, a huge process, because if I don't see it and you don't like it, then we don't have to continue.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's almost like coming up with the scope of work, or the whatever it is statement under IR35.
Yeah.
You know, so that kind of works as well, I suppose, in some ways. But I was just thinking that, you know, I mean, I know you guys do it, but I haven't been involved in one for a long time, of having a kind of almost a business breakfast or a virtual Zoom business breakfast with a bunch of clients to kind of chat about the issues of the day and the collective experience that some of us have brought to that, and whether or not there's a market for that, or whether clients are all just running around like headless chickens and they have no time. Yeah,
I mean, it's sometimes based on the strength of the relationship, to be honest. I mean, sometimes my my inner circle of clients, if you like, will take more of my word as gospel than others. And sometimes there are traditional hirers that still will want a CV and will they want the time to sit in the boardroom with a coffee, perusing and sort of reading CVs line by line. But there are others where they'll go, well, yeah, we actually know that you've done a lot of this for some of our competitors. Who do we need to see? Well, and who don't bother sending me CVs, just tee up some a coffee. So I do a bit of a mix, to be honest. And I think with the digital's a funny one, because sometimes it's a step into the unknown. They don't really, for the first time, know what they're talking about or what they want. And they almost have to rely on someone else, which is a bit of a nervous experience for clients that are potentially looking at spending a lot of money with us. So I think that gone are the days where you can put in a digital expert into a business on a day rate with no accountability, close the door, look, you interviewed him, we wish you well, check you in 6 months, hope it turns out to be a good hire. And that's the nervous bit for the client that puts clients off, because it's just like, God, this idiot's just charged me 150 grand to put someone in that he's told me is good, and he's closed the door. But this is where statement of work sometimes comes, not just as a way to navigate the red tape of IR35, but it actually, look, I will put my money where my mouth is, and I know that, look, if you do this right with this person, they know what they're doing, and these are going to be the material, tangible outcomes that you can look to benefit from at the end. Let's monetize them. We'll give him or her a nominal day rate, and we'll give them some skin in the game and some upside at the end.
Yeah.
And that sells well, because that takes a lot of the risk out of it, because it's almost not no win, no fee, but my credibility is at stake, the candidate's credibility is at stake, and so is the clients in the eyes of their shareholders and the rest of the board.
Yeah.
So everyone's got everything to lose.
Yeah.
Everyone can get paid if it's not properly.
And that's the thing about the true interim, I suppose, is that, you know, we've got substantial or sufficient financial runway to kind of do that stuff, and a risk profile that matches it.
Yeah. Good interims will jump at an opportunity to do a statement of work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly that.
Yeah.
Willem, I'm conscious you've been quietly listening there. Give us, just because I think a couple of the guys weren't on when we were talking, but you've done assignments in any number of European countries, haven't you?
Yes, I've been. I think it was 12 or 13 countries so far.
And which are they?
The UK actually was the first country when I became interim. My first project came from the UK. So actually, this is one of the reasons why I'm still keeping the IIM membership, and because I would like to keep the contacts alive. That's the first point. And second point is that I still consider the UK like a country where the interim management almost started together with the Netherlands. And then I had projects in the Netherlands, Belgium, France, Italy, Germany, Slovakia, Czech Republic, Poland, and Hungary.
And for the benefit of our two ISP representatives, I mean, how many languages do you speak?
Actually, I speak 3 languages. I'm fluent in 3 languages, English, Czech, and Slovak. German is a little bit crappy, but I can understand something. And a little bit Russian, but, you know, our relationship to Russian language is a little bit difficult. So,
yeah.
So we have
what sort of projects are you involved with?
Pardon?
What sort of projects are you involved with in these countries?
Usually logistics, supply chain, and operations.
Within retail?
Not only retail, FMCG, automotive, pharma, now agricultural, building segment. So, so quite more segments.
Okay, interesting.
A little bit of a side one there, gents. I do speak a few languages as well, but I never tell anyone that. It's always quite handy in a boardroom when someone decides to speak in a foreign language in front of you. You can learn a lot.
Yeah, well
most of my career was spent internationally. And quick story, when I was based in Austria and we launched one of our first operating units in Austria, for a whole 18 months, I never spoke in German at all to anyone. And when we finally got to the end of the event of launching the company, I ordered dinner in a restaurant in full German, and not one of the Austrians could even speak after I'd ordered it, because they suddenly realized what they had been saying to all of the non-Austrians in the room about the non-Austrians in the room throughout all those board meetings. And I fully understood everything, and there was literally a jaw drop.
That's
so it's a handy technique, gents.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, the reason I bring it up is obviously to, showcase your talents. But I've come across, and I've had conversations with ISPs on assignments, or the client, they're a PE house or whoever they are, but they need a fluent French, Spanish, whatever it might be, speaker.
Yeah.
And I've gone, but if you're an idiot, you're an idiot in French. So what difference is that going to make? Because, okay, and unless nobody speaks English, I've worked a bit like Willem. I've worked in probably 3-4, Spain, Germany, worked for a Spanish company, worked for Telefonica. And it's never really been a problem, the language thing. But obviously, I wish I could speak half a dozen languages. That would be very handy.
Until the point that you step in a McDonald's in Paris and trying to order a meal in English, nobody would serve you.
Well, I can speak schoolboy French and I can speak schoolboy Spanish, but but you find with a good Scots tongue in your head, it does get you. It does. It does get you a long way.
Well, they typically say if you're multilingual, you speak more than 3 languages. Bilingual 2, and 1, you're British.
Yeah.
Dave, that's spot on, my friend.
Yeah.
Bruce, I've got to go because I've got to.
Yeah. Well, listen, I think
2 minutes.
I think we're at a natural point, aren't we? So listen, Dave and Richard, and obviously Ben in his absence, thanks again. That's really been fascinating. I hope you've got something out of it. We certainly have. Absolutely. You've been very generous with your time, both as individuals and your firms. So on behalf of me and the IIM and the guys who have tuned in, a huge thank you.
Thank you.
And hopefully we'll see you soon. Maybe work with you in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Thank
you. Take care now. Thank you.
Take
care.
Gentlemen.
Bye.
Thank you.